Hi, everybody. David Fogel with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, and we're here for another Symphonina Foundation podcast on this January 6th, 2025. And I have the delight and pleasure to be joined by composer Stanley Grill today. Stanley, how are you doing?
I'm great. Fun to be here with you. Always good to chat face to face.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
much better than Facebook messages.
Absolutely. We've done a lot of Facebook messaging over the last two plus years, but I think this is the first time we've had a chance to get to be in a face-to-face, and that's great. And I apologize to everybody who's going to listen to the podcast and not watch it, but you get your audio, and hopefully we'll give you some entertaining stuff to think about and also some good compositional ideas. And Stanley's been composing. We had a little discussion before we got started. I was saying the earliest thing I could find on his website was from 2017, but clearly I did not dig deep enough because the earliest is maybe 1976. And as we were saying, maybe the things before that haven't survived. Maybe they weren't intended to survive. I don't know. So Stanley, when did you start your journey in composition?
So I've always been obsessed with music since the earliest age. I went to the Bronx High School of Science, of all places, and spent all my time cutting classes and practicing music, and only applied to one school, went to the Manhattan School of Music, where as I began to learn, started writing music, mostly originally in response to assignments I was given by teachers. And none of that survived because when I looked at it years later, it was just like, meh, this isn't so good. And so if you look at my website, all that I have up on there is anything I thought was worthy of survival.
Well, sometimes, we start with ideas that aren't in their aren't really in their finished form, and we can evolve them and mold them into other things that are great. So have you ever gone back to any of those ideas that you've discarded and said, no, we're going to try to make something of this, or you just move on?
I just move on. I'm working on something new all the time, and once it's done, I'm not going back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you a little in terms of like how you go about composing today. Do you do that directly from a score program like Dorico or MuseScore or Sibelius or Finale, something like that? Or do you work out of a digital audio workstation and play your parts into it? What's your compositional flow look like?
So I just write music on a laptop. I'm sitting in my attic at the moment, and that's where I do most of my writing. My piano is 2 floors away, and I never go near it when I'm composing. I used Finale for 3 decades, I guess. And then when they announced their demise after several weeks of complete panic and hysteria, I wound up purchasing Dorica, and I've already composed half a dozen pieces with it. I'm happily buzzing along, figuring it out as I go.
That's good. So I wasn't a Finale user really, so it didn't affect me directly, but I have many friends who were, and there was a lot of angst about Finale closing doors and recommending everybody go to Dorico. What was your actual experience with the learning curve for Dorico?
My first action was to export. I spent weeks doing this, exporting all my Finale scores to XML. And then I took an XML orchestral piece and loaded into pilot versions of Sibelius, Dorico, and MuseScore. And the only one that opened up with a remotely readable score that didn't require hours of finagling with was Dorico. So that's what got me to purchase Dorico. And it worked completely differently, but I learned by doing, not by looking at whatever YouTubes. I started small. I wrote a little suite for solo violin, just one instrument. I went on and did some things for voice and piano. Then I wrote a small work for choir so I could practice and learn how to put voices and lyrics into a multi-part score, and so on and so forth. And so little by little, I've been writing bigger and bigger pieces. Frankly, really happy this happened because I discovered that Dorico does a whole lot of things very well that Finale did not. And while I'd gotten used to fixing things that were not done well in Finale manually without even thinking about it, I don't have to do that at all with Oracle. I pretty much enter all the notes, publish the score at the end, comes out looking great. It's been good.
Sometimes it reminds me, sometimes there's an analogy to climbing a mountain and you want to find the highest peak, right? So you climb up and you find a peak and you're in a fog and you think it might be the top. So you stop and you explore that area and you get very familiar with that area. And then the fog lifts and you can see there's another peak somewhere else that you need to climb to if you really want to get to the top. In this case, it's more like everybody was at that other top and the top just got taken away from them. And so they're forced to climb to another peak, really. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes you can actually get to a better place that it sounds like you have in your experience. That's very cool. Let me go back to your early days. Were you first learning on the piano or some other instrument?
Oh, so way back when, let's go to the beginning.
Yeah,
My
let's go
mother
to the
took
beginning.
me to Carnegie Hall when I was 6 years old, and I heard a recital that ended with Debussy's La Mer. And I was sitting way up in what we call seventh heaven seats at Carnegie Hall because we didn't have a lot of money. So I guess that was what my mother could afford. I was totally enraptured. All those little tiny people so far down there, I was overwhelmed and came home begging for piano lessons, which my mother kept saying, "You're too young, you're too young." No, 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 no. I fought and eventually got piano lessons. And I've been in love with music the entire time. I'm obsessed with it. Life is dishes out hard stuff to all of us. And I can't imagine it without the solace of music. It's been my relief valve for my entire life.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And by the way, I had a not exactly the same experience, but another epiphany experience as you did at Carnegie Hall. But I was in my 20s and inspired me to start composing orchestral music. So I don't know what it is about Carnegie Hall. Maybe there are other people who have that same epiphany in their own way there or some other place. But I totally get what you're saying. It's just you have the benefit of having it much younger than I did. So that's great. When you were doing your music composition growing up, did you always focus on what we would call classical music, or did you ever branch out into other genres, rock and roll or something else? Many of us want to be
So,
rock stars when we're younger.
not me. Maybe, and I'm trying to think back. In junior high school, I got into a little garage band with some friends. This is literally junior high school, so I was 14 or something like that.
Mhm.
And I remember playing 96 Tears and thinking to myself, this is so boring. I'm going home and playing Mozart sonatas. This is horrifying. Who would want to do this?
Yeah. Well, it's good when you're 14 to be able to play Mozart sonatas. Not every piano playing 14-year-old can do that, but
Yeah.
that's excellent. Well, okay, so you've composed a lot of things. You've worked with a lot of different professional people in your life, and more recently, I'm familiar with your albums Against War and We Will Not Forget and The Bridge.
Mhm.
And I think it would be good to have a little bit of inspiration from you about, a little bit of communication from you about what inspired those recent compositions, many of which have been recognized by different organizations with awards. So why don't we start with The Bridge and we can go from there.
I have COVID to thank for a lot of my recent big projects. 2 years sitting here in my attic with nowhere else to go, just me and my wife stuck in the house, but no distractions. No, can you come out and meet us for dinner? Nothing else to do but write music. And that caused me to have not just the time, but the mental space to focus on some ideas that have been floating around in the back of my mind that I could never before quite got around to figure out how do I do that. So The Bridge is a book more than a poem. There's 15 separate poems in that. It's an epic poem of America that I'd had on my bookshelf for decades, read on and off over the years. And it's so large, I never could figure out what to do with it musically. But then I hauled it out during COVID and started looking at it and suddenly said, why don't I do this? And wound up writing this fantasy for viola and orchestra, just a musical reaction to each of the poems. And I researched, he clearly loved music. This is the poet, Hart Crane. And there are many musical references throughout all these poems. So I researched each of them. He was living in New York City at the time he wrote it in the 20s, 1920s. There are jukebox songs that he references. There are American folk songs. So I researched all that material and then embedded the melodies into the movements that reflect those poems where he mentioned them. So that was a fun thing to do. It's an old-fashioned thing to do. It goes back, Quodlibet goes back to early Renaissance composers who would do masses based sometimes on bawdy songs, which I always found to be very amusing.
Yeah.
So
Stanley, if I remember correctly, you recorded that with the Czech Chamber Orchestra or Philharmonic.
I did.
Yeah. What was your experience like working with them?
Again, during COVID, I previously had written mostly chamber works because I couldn't see how I would get larger works performed, let alone recorded. But during COVID, again, having that time, started writing a lot more music for orchestra. And when I said, okay, now I have to figure out how to get these recorded, this is the plan I followed. I got onto Naxos's website and looked at which orchestras they were using to record new music, listened to dozens of recordings, reached out to the orchestras which I thought were the best, and waited to see who got back to me. And this orchestra in the Czech Republic responded. The conductor reached out to me. And I did my first short EP with a 20-minute four-movement work called Ahimsa. Flew to the Czech Republic to record it, just to see, okay, let's see how this works out, and loved working with them. So we've since done 4 or 5 other albums. That's how I got to work with them. And fortunately for me, the other orchestras who I was going back and forth with at the time were all in Russia. And thank goodness I didn't wind
The
up
world
doing
moves in
something with
strange
them.
ways, Stanley.
I wouldn't be traveling to Russia now.
No. Coincidentally, tomorrow morning, we'll be recording my Symphonina number 4 with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra. And I will not be in Budapest, Hungary. I'll be sitting right here on a Zoom, listening to them perform it and record it using the Listen To app, along with all of our producer colleagues on the album, Gary Gray, Daniel Fisher, Gabriel Mulder, and a few other people. And that experience has been great for me, and enjoyed working with them. But everybody has to find their own orchestral home for the things that they want to get recorded. And I think, once you have a established professional positive relationship, it's great because it builds upon itself as you go with whatever organization it is. So I admire that you were able to go and be in the recording studio at the time. That's awesome. I look forward to doing that someday myself, and certainly would encourage everybody who's an orchestral composer to take advantage of that opportunity or make that opportunity for themselves if they can. I can only imagine, but maybe you can tell us if you can have the experience in your mind of being on a Zoom, listening to the orchestra record you, or being in the room. I'm betting being in the room is about 100 times better.
Yeah, I did actually reach out to Budapest Scoring Orchestra and even had priced out some things with them, but ultimately decided I'd rather be present than doing it remotely. And in this orchestra, they record actually outside of Prague in a town called Pardubice at the music conservatory that's in the town. So there's a large hall for the orchestra with mics all over the stage, to wires snaking down a hallway to a little room in the back where the engineer is. And I sit there with headphones, and whatever comments I make, somebody translates for me into Czech. And it all works out. And I enjoy meeting the musicians. It's just a wonderful experience.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. When you're sitting there with the engineer, do you get to work on the post-production engineering as well, or do you leave that in other people's hands and then critique the product and let it go in an iterative cycle that way?
The latter. While I'm sitting there, we talk about the sound right then and there until the balances are right. And I'm able to make comments on all the, um, as we go from segment to segment reporting, making sure we have enough good takes that I'm happy with. But then they put it together. They email me the files, and I put together a long email saying, with 2 minutes and 15 seconds, there's a click. At 2 minutes and 33 seconds, the piccolo's not quite in tune, or whatever my comments are.
Yeah.
And they fix everything. And at some point, I say, go forth and master. And
Yeah.
they send me the mastered files, and I do everything else myself to the album release. I've gone over the last couple of years 100% indie. I do the cover artwork, I do the release, I do the CDs. I have somebody just, make CDs for me. I mail them out to radio stations. I do it all myself.
That's great. That's great. And that must give you a sense of satisfaction too when you hear back from people you establish relationships with. And they're probably your friends by this point. You've been doing a lot of things and get to know people and follow their own careers and lives, I assume.
It's great. I just had a brand new piece on the radio yesterday morning in Montana, of all places, from an album that I haven't even released yet. It's all good. It's a lot of fun.
That's nice. So let's move forward to this year, 2025. You have a new project in the works that's going to get released. Let's talk about that. It's a single, Thorn and Other Songs. What is the motivation for that?
So before we get to that,
Oh, okay.
I have a new album that's coming out on the 17th on Bandcamp, and then for broader release a month later,
Okay.
in February, on all the other streaming media, with music from my Music for the Earth series. So,
Wonderful.
obsessed with the fact that the political will to do something about climate change isn't there. And it's probably the most existential threat mankind faces that everybody is blithely ignoring. I've been writing music for the earth for quite a while now, and I recorded 3 works from that collection, orchestral works, again with the same orchestra in the Czech Republic back last May. And I have a violin concerto, a piano concerto, and a 4 movement, 40-minute symphony um, on this new album that's about to come out.
Wonderful.
And,
all right. Well, you keep us posted on that when it's released, and we'll make sure that we do a little promotion for you.
Oh, that would be great. I'll
Absolutely.
send you links.
Yes,
and then
absolutely.
The next project is I'll be in Mannheim, Germany with the string orchestra in May, but with the same singer from Vienna who's recorded, who I've worked with on other recordings. And I just love her voice. I love working with her. She's just fabulous. Lisa Rombach. So we'll be meeting in Mannheim. And A Single Thorn is with poems by a Canadian poet named Meg Freer that are all on, again, part of my Music for the Earth series. They're about nature and what happens if we ignore what's coming. I have another song cycle from a wonderful book of poems about the 1918 flu epidemic that I wrote during COVID, because here we are again 100 years later, and we didn't seem to learn the lessons of 100 years ago. We're doing it all over. So I thought those poems were relevant. So that's also for soprano and string orchestra and some other pieces.
When do you expect the Single Thorn and Other Songs release to come?
That's a good question. Given that I'm just doing an album that's coming out now, I probably won't release that new one until next fall. If I'm recording it in April, by the end of the summer, I should have everything edited and done. That always takes time. These guys are busy. They record for Naxos and they're pretty busy. So by the time all that happens, it's months down the road. So I think by fall of next year,
I appreciate that. Your inspirations are very grand, both the natural physical world and, of course, inspiring and promoting peace. And these are things we should all aspire to, I think, as we're translating what our feelings are into music, Did you ever have any other inspirations as a composer along the way? I know that's what you focused on more recently.
So a lot of my pieces are composed in response to something. An hour ago, I was on a Zoom call with somebody from the Ukrainian operetta company because they're looking for music from American composers that demonstrate support for Ukrainians during the war. And I happen to have a half dozen pieces that I've already composed in support of Ukrainians' desperate attempt to become free from Russian violence. So I have a symphony, I have a string symphony, I have my first and only setting of a poem in Ukrainian for baritone and orchestra. That was fun to do. And hopefully, that's been recorded, by the way. So I actually know that the Ukrainian works. It was a Ukrainian baritone sung the song. And I have a string quartet based upon variations on Ukrainian folk songs. So that's one other example. And of course, I now and then write something just because I have another idea. But most of it's inspired by world events that I can't do a thing about other than complain and write music.
It's the composer's lament, and we all experience it in one way or another, whatever's inspiring us in that moment. But that's true. In terms of your story raises a good question. Can people contact you and commission you to write things for them?
They can, always open to the idea. In this case, like with the this Ukrainian company, there's pieces I've already written that they're interested in performing. If somebody gives me an idea that I'm interested in writing, I'll do it. But if I'm not interested, I won't because I'm an old guy. I'm not interested in writing something that doesn't interest me. I write whatever I feel like writing. I've always been independent that way. And I just want to do what I want to do.
Yeah, well,
So
one of the things that you have wanted to do, which we greatly appreciate at the Symphonina Foundation, is you've helped us as a judge for our composer contest now for a couple of years. And the composer contest is in its final round for this year for the best in Symphonina of 2024 and the runner-up. Hopefully both of them will be recorded on our album for this year. And it's a lot of volunteering. I appreciate everything that you're doing there, Stanley, and appreciate your music. And I think if anybody has an idea for wanting to run something by Stanley, they have a composer with more than 50 years of experience doing this, and I think you're a great resource for them and for us, and we greatly appreciate it.
yeah, I enjoy doing that. I enjoy listening. As you know, some people submit things and you go, gee, they could use some lessons. And others are, writing really fabulous orchestral music. So it's fun to listen to the whole range of things, and I enjoy doing it.
I appreciate that. As part of a nonprofit to try to promote the joy of symphonic music to really everyone around the world, but young audiences in particular, which means younger than you and me, Stanley. We have to try our best to help people wherever they are in that composer journey. And if they're just starting or they have things to learn, it's helpful for our judges to give good comments. And I think really as composers, we all have things to learn. I haven't spoken to John Williams, but I bet he would say he has things to learn too. So we all have things to learn no matter where we are in that journey, and getting constructive feedback from the judges as we do in our contests is very helpful. And I greatly appreciate your participation in that. Stanley, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
I'm on all social media, so people should just connect with me on my website. You can email me or just info@stangrillcomposer.com is my email address, and just get in touch.
Okay, that's info@stangrillcomposer.com. I think your website is the same, right? Stangrillcomposer.com. Yeah. Well, Stanley, we wish you all the best success for your recording and your projects in 2025, and we'll definitely keep in touch and see what you're working on as we go. And as I say, when you get the release time of your new projects, let us know. We'll be more than happy to help promote them. And until then, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure chatting with you.